Great to have everybody tune in with us today. We're going to be reading in Psalm 69 this week, but actually, we're going to do a podcast that will cover Psalm 69 and a psalm that'll cover next week's reading, John 2. And the reason we're doing that is because they go together.
Right.
Right. So let's start with John 2. We need to begin there because at the end of John 2, we have this, well, what some find to be a disturbing incident where Jesus goes in and finds these people corrupting his father's house, the temple, and he runs them out.
Right.
And when he does that, here in John 2, verse 17, his disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." Now, two things about that. Number one, there's our word, zeal, in kind of an odd context. and then that is actually a quotation from Psalm 69. So
that's the connection.
Yeah, so since all that was Jeff's idea, I'm going to throw him on the bus. And I'm going to say, okay, two questions now. Why John 2 and particularly this phrase?
Yeah.
And then let's marry that with Psalm 69, which is actually our reading for this week.
Right. So working backwards, John 2, the quotation here does a couple of different things. Number one, it shows Jesus' zeal for the right and proper and pure worship of God. And so with the money changers there and the ruining of a genuine worship experience for those who came there to worship properly, Jesus drives them out. Zeal for your house will consume me. Jesus wants to see, and this is part of our good works that go beyond, again, good works of hospitality, benevolence, as important as those are. Worship is a good work. Right worship is a good work. And so Jesus, in his zeal here, drives out the money chambers so that worship of God in that place can be purified. But the other thing that this does is it sets up the real tension in John's gospel. Jesus, of course, will talk more about the temple in the context here, right? Destroy this temple in 3 days, I'll rebuild it. He didn't mean the building, he meant his body. The real tension for Jesus in John's gospel is not with Pharisees or what we're used to from the synoptics. His real tension is with the temple authorities, with the chief priests and the religious rulers affiliated with the temple. And so this is the beginning of that issue for him. By the time you get to John chapter 11, John chapter 12, it's these temple authorities who want Jesus dead, these chief priests and authorities affiliated with the temple who want Jesus dead. And so this, again, brings us now back to Psalm 69 in particular.
With this kind of incident setting them off.
That's right. That's the beginning of this growing tension between him and them.
Right.
That's exactly right. At the beginning of the story, we're kind of given a hint of where the danger for Jesus is ultimately going to come from.
Right.
Just even, by the way, in John chapter 11, Thomas's kind of snarky comment, let's go to Jerusalem and die with him. Jerusalem had become a dangerous place because of Jerusalem, the leadership of Jerusalem and the temple's anger towards Jesus. That starts here in chapter 2. So Jesus is zealous for right and pure worship. But the other thing is, and this brings us back to Psalm 69, when you read all of Psalm 69, remember New Testament quotations were not meant just to pick up on the line itself and the most immediate application, but we're meant to see the whole context.
But that is so important.
It is.
So often we see a quotation in the New Testament and we just go back and look and make sure it's there.
The prophecy was fulfilled.
Yep. Psalm 69 actually said that, so we're good. We can move on.
Right.
When in reality, sometimes what it's really more like is a footnote saying, go here and read more.
That's right. And when you do that now, when you read all of Psalm 69, it's a long psalm. It's a lament psalm. And one of the major things that the psalmist is lamenting about is how the zeal for God and his righteousness has led to persecution for him. And it's led to persecution not just from the world, but even from others who profess religion. Just like in Jesus' case, you would think the chief priests and the religious leaders of the Jews would be on his side.
Nope.
But they're the ones who are going to want him dead, starting right here with this tension that begins. So one of the other things that we then learn when we bring Psalm 69 fully into view is a reminder that zeal for God, zeal for righteousness, zeal for right worship will often lead to trouble in this life from those who even may claim to love God or follow God, but don't really do so. And so we wind up, therefore, persecuted, some sort of strife or difficulty in our life because we are zealous for God.
So are you guys picking up on the idea that Jeff is determined this year to broaden our understanding of what good works are?
Yeah.
And this is really coming out of left field because I don't think that most people, when they think about good works, are thinking about what we find here in John
It's
2.
a very broad concept.
So a couple of things going on. One of them is the anger
Right.
that we see here. In
That's
fact, I
right.
think a lot of folks are very uncomfortable with the John 2 story
Right.
because Jesus is angry.
That's right.
And I think we need to be careful. I don't think that, his anger is out of control here.
Right.
I think, though, it is righteous anger
Absolutely.
that and remember, this is his Father's house, and they have corrupted it.
Right.
And stirred by anger, he is moved to address that and deal
Right.
with it, which I think identifies another realm of good works, and that is good works that are spurred by righteous anger.
That's right.
And like in this context, in our own time, we see men who have corrupted worship,
Right.
and we ought to be angry about
That's
people
right.
who've corrupted God's worship and move to address that in the way that he wants us to, by confronting error
That's right.
and exposing it for what it is.
That's right. And to your point, Dave, I think it's important for us to recognize that it is not a blind rage. It is a controlled anger for the right reason and in the right way, though it is anger. And part of what makes it righteous anger is it's not self-serving. It's not the anger of you wronged me and I want vengeance against you or something like that. It's anger on God's behalf because God's place has been violated, because his name has been sullied, because his word is not being followed. And so it's an anger on God's behalf. It's not a self-oriented anger where I want vengeance because you wronged me. It's I want God to be rightly worshiped. I want his name kept pure, his place of worship kept pure. And to my mind, David, I think this is one of those things that also reminds us then that we perhaps are more indifferent than we ought to be sometimes to religious error, to wrong worship, where in our very kind of tolerant age, well, we just everybody live and let live, we ought to at least, it ought to resonate with us more, it ought to trouble us more that religious error is taught, that wrong worship is promulgated. And it ought to move us more than it does, I think, a lot of times.
Well, that then also circles in and grabs worship that honors God his way
Right.
as also a good work.
That's right.
And we ought to be concerned in our worship that what we're doing honors God. I think that is, in fact, a fundamental shift that's happened in our religious world the last 30 or 40 years, away from this sense that I do this for God, I do this to honor
Right.
God, and it's become about, I do this for me, what's in it for me. Sometimes we even hear that in the way we talk about worship.
Yeah.
Well, that lesson wasn't applicable to me, or
Right.
we didn't sing the songs I liked, and we
Right.
evaluate worship based on self
Right.
rather than on God. And I think that the world has just run away with that
Of course.
now, where worship has become an entertainment hour rather than an hour to lift up
Right.
and honor God. And so I think that seeing worship as a good work we do, and worship that needs to honor God,
Right.
again, is broadening our understanding of what good works really are.
And so this concept of zeal for your house has consumed me is actually a huge one that really works in multiple directions we need to think about for the next couple weeks.
Well, maybe that would be a good thing to be pondering as you read first through Psalm 69 this week, and if you're listening to this in the following week, John 2 in the next week's reading, because this podcast will serve for both of those. Think about that phrase and the zealousness we ought to feel for worshiping God and for worshiping in a way that truly honors him,
Right.
and the anger we ought to feel when that isn't done, and ponder what we ought to be doing about that in our time.
And understanding that it's going to get us opposed and persecuted sometimes when we show that
thanks
zeal.
for tagging, because that's
Psalm 69.
That's
in
Psalm
earnest.
69. Yeah,
Yeah.
that isn't always going to be popular and embraced,
Right.
though it's still right, and it's a good work.
Absolutely.
So a lot to think about this week and next week as we read Psalm 69.